Our project today is a fun knit headband with a twist in the front. This is a super easy project. You're just going to need one piece of knit fabric, some thread, and your sewing machine. First, you want to cut a piece of fabric that measures 8 inches wide by 20 to 21 inches long. You want to make sure when you cut your fabric that the stretch is going along the length of the fabric because the headband needs to stretch around your head. Some fabrics have four-way stretch, and this is an example of a fabric that stretches both horizontally and vertically. Some knits will only stretch vertically, so make sure you check your fabric to see which direction the stretch is going. So once you get that cut, we're going to fold our fabric right sides together long ways, and we are going to do a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch seam all the way down the side of the fabric so that we end up with a long tube. Working with knits is a little different than working with cotton. Knit fabric stretches, so the stitches need to be able to stretch in your fabric. One way that you can do this is by using a straight stitch and actually stretching the fabric as you sew. A second way to build stretch into your stitches is to use the stretch stitch that's built into your machine, and the symbol actually looks like a little lightning bolt. The third way to build stretch into your stitches is to use a narrow lengthened zigzag stitch on your machine. Today we're going to use the straight stitch and we're going to stretch our fabric as we sew. Another really important thing to remember is you need a special needle for working with stretch fabrics. A jersey or ballpoint needle is designed to sew knit fabrics, and I typically use an 80-12 or a 70-10 size needle, but it's really important to use a needle specifically designed for knit fabrics. So let's go to the machine and start stitching. Let's talk a little bit about actually starting our row of stitching. Occasionally, knit fabrics can be a little difficult to get started, and sometimes the fabric has a tendency to get shoved down inside the opening here in the throat plate. So a good technique is to take a small piece of fabric, some people call this a leader, and to actually start stitching on the small piece of fabric first, and then start your knit fabric under the presser foot. So I've started my row of stitching, and I went ahead and reversed about 3 stitches at the beginning. I want to make sure I reverse at the beginning and the end of this seam so that I secure that and the headband doesn't come apart. I'm not going to actually start stretching the fabric until I've taken a few stitches. And then as I sew, I am actually going to stretch this fabric while I'm sewing. Okay, and you want to make sure that you're not pulling the fabric from behind, but that you are only stretching the fabric in the front. So I'm just holding it in the back, and then I'm stretching it in the front as I sew. And I'm going to continue to do this all the way down the length of the headband. I'm almost to the end of the seam, and at this point I've stopped stretching the fabric, and I'm going to continue to sew until I get pretty close to the end, and then I want to reverse. Now you want to make sure that you don't sew off of the fabric because again, knits sometimes have a tendency to get shoved down inside this throat plate. So we want to make sure that we stop sewing right before we get to the end and reverse about 3 stitches. I want to show you that this row of stitching actually looks a little wavy, and that's normal because remember we were stretching the fabric. But if I stretch that row out, you can see how those stitches actually look normal, and that's what we're looking for if we've built some stretch into our stitches. After you've sewn the seam, you want to turn the tube right side out, and then you want to center the seam in the middle of the tube. The next step is to lay the tube out in front of you and make sure that you have the seam side up. And at this point, we are going to put the ends of the headband together in a way that forms a twist. So you're going to take the end of the headband closest to you and you're going to bring it up to meet the other end of the headband. And we're actually only going to overlap these in the middle. Okay, so we want to use the middle of the seam on the bottom piece now. Okay, and we want to place the edge of the headband right along that seam. Okay, and the next step is to take this extra piece of fabric and to turn it under. So basically what we're doing around this side of the headband is we're forming a C shape with the fabric. So if I tilt that up, you can see how that's wrapping around. Okay, after you do that, you're going to take the bottom piece and you're going to lay it, fold it over and lay it on top of the headband. Okay, so let me show you that one more time. Lay your headband in front of you vertically. Take the end that's closest to you, bring it up, and place the edge of the headband along the middle of the seam. Okay. Then take the extra piece of fabric that's left over and just fold it around. And again, we're almost forming a C shape around this right side of the headband. Okay, and once you have that, then you're going to take the fabric that's left over and you're going to fold it over top of the other piece of the headband. Once you have your ends folded correctly, it's a good idea to place a pin through all of the layers to secure and hold them together. We're going to be stitching across all of these layers to hold them together. It's really important that you do your back stitching at the beginning and at the end because this part of the headband is going to get a lot of pulling and tugging when you put the headband on and take it off. And when you start sewing, you want to start really slow and give your machine time to grab hold of the fabric and just sew slowly across all of these layers. Let's go to the machine and we'll do that. In this step, I'm actually going to use the right side of my presser foot as a guide for my seam allowance. And I'm actually going to start away from the edge and I'm going to back stitch first. Then I'm going to start slowly sewing across this seam. And sometimes you have to give that a little tug to get it going. Remember to stop when you get close to your pins and remove them. So here you can see the finished seam allowance. Now at this point, it's a good idea to try on your headband and make sure that the fit's going to be correct. Occasionally, if your fabric's really stretchy, your headband may need to be tightened up a little bit. And if that's the case, you could move over to the left and do a wider seam allowance and shorten the headband a little bit. But I've tried this on, it fits, and so the next thing we're going to do is open this up and get the little twist in the front. After you make sure your headband's going to fit, go ahead and trim off the seam allowance to make it about 1/4 inch. Then you can start unwrapping or untwisting those ends that you stitched together. And when you do that, you get this really cool twist in the front. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you have fun making your own twisted headband.